In his commentary on the Kena Upanishad, Sri Aurobindo is leading us now to a deeper understanding of the origin and nature of our senses. In the previous chapter, we have seen that the foundation of all sense is essentially contact of the mind with an object, and as a result, a mental reproduction of its image. This is at the root of all things which we call sense experience. He described also there 4 necessary functions whenever active consciousness or mind is involved. And we saw 4 names: Vijnana, Prajnana, Samjnana and Ajnana, which we will be meeting shortly now. And with this, we have begun to see that senses are not essentially physical, biological phenomena, but they are consciousness phenomena, mental phenomena in essence. And in the chapter we are reading now, Sri Aurobindo brings in the perspective of Indian psychology, which sees mind as the 6th sense, or when seeing both powers of knowledge and powers of action, it is counted as the 11th sense, the 6th sense of knowledge, 6th sense of action. And in the discussion last time, Sri Aurobindo gave 3 examples which cannot be explained by conventional understanding of the senses or of the mind, but are explained only when we look behind to the deeper perception that the Upanishad declares that the mind in us is infinite. Because the mind within us is infinite, therefore these phenomena are possible. Sri Aurobindo has selected the 3 examples very carefully. He chooses them not only for their obvious meaning, but the 3 together represent 3 different facets of life experience, and each within has some deeper nuances. And so before we proceed, I wanted to explore these a little more in the context of what we read last time. The first example Sri Aurobindo gives is of the illiterate servant girl. While she is working, she hears her master reciting Hebrew. For her, the words have no meaning. Her conscious mind is not paying attention. At best, her conscious mind is involved in the immediate task before her, perhaps sweeping the floor. Here is a stain which is too sticky, it's not coming off. What is this thing? But mostly her mind will be drifting, thinking of other things, remembering other issues, or daydreaming generally. And yet, when she is in an abnormal condition of a high fever, when the conscious mind has been completely blocked, we find that she is able to spontaneously reproduce all those things which she heard her master reciting with extraordinary accuracy, with the same intonation and rhythm in which he was doing. How do you explain this? Because she was not even listening, not even trying to remember. And when she comes out of her fever, she cannot reproduce that whole behavior. The conscious mind was not paying attention, but the inner subliminal mind in us, which is infinite, is registering. The second example he has given is of a person who is put under anesthetic for surgery, and when under anesthetic, the biology of the senses has been blocked. When you make a cut causing pain, there is no signal passing through the nerves to reach the brain to be registered as a conscious awareness of the touch or of the pain. So biologically, the whole thing has been numbed out. Perhaps even if it is general anesthesia, then the brain itself has been put into a kind of a stupor of sleep, and the person himself is not conscious. There is neither registration of pain signals going through the nerves, nor registration in the mind or brain of what is actually happening. You are actually in deep sleep, if at all, or you are unconscious. And yet, after the surgery, under hypnosis, when the subconscious mind is released, he can describe accurately every detail of the operation and all the sufferings involved, meaning even as the knife cuts through the tissue, he feels the tissue or describes how the tissue feels itself cut and torn apart, how the knife poked into the bone and what kind of pressure and pain it produced, and so on. The physical sense organs are shut down, but the larger mind within is observing and also feeling without needing the biology. Now, in the first example of the servant girl, Sri Aurobindo has described a case where you are registering things happening outside you through the five senses, which are obviously operational. So you might say something inside the brain is registering, even if the person's mind was elsewhere. But in the second example, the physical machinery of the five senses has been shut down, and yet there is a registration. So these two examples point to very different types of perception. And the other difference is, in the first example, you're registering something outside yourself. In the second example, you're conscious of something happening within yourself. And we'll see now the third example is also very distinct in what it points to. The third example he gives is of the insect which is trying to bring food for its children, and it goes out and must catch its victim. Each insect has its own particular food that is healthy for it, or things which are not healthy. Here Sri Aurobindo describes how the insect directs a sting skillfully, unerringly, without error, with precision, into the victim which it has to make numb in order to grab to eat. It does this precisely without physically, externally knowing the anatomy of the victim, and yet is able to hit precisely where necessary to make the victim numb, and then whatever is needed to eat it or bring it to its children. We could extend this example a little more and see also examples where the animal knows what is healthy for it and what is poisonous for it. When in nature you see animals eating fruits or berries from plants, there are berries which are bright red and attractive, but the animal smells and moves away. It knows this is poisonous. There are mushrooms which are very tasty. There are mushrooms which are extremely poisonous. And the animal knows and chooses accordingly. It's the same kind of knowledge. Sri Aurobindo explains how it directs the sting as unerringly as the most skillful surgeon. And so the character of this third example is one more not only of knowledge but also of action. The knowledge itself is not accessible to the three senses, to the five senses. It is neither within us, it is inside another, which even the other does not know. If the snake has to sting the rabbit and render it unconscious, it does not know what is biology and the nervous system inside the body. And yet, when it bites, it inserts its fangs exactly at the right place, on the nervous system, on a major nerve, in order to render the whole rabbit immobile and then unconscious. That precision of knowledge of something else which even that thing does not know. See, that's the nature of the third example. And it involves an action which is reaching out to do something it has never done before, and yet to do it accurately and precisely in tune with that knowledge. Now consider a child. Children, we have all had to do such games. You throw a ring at a distance and there's a wooden stick and you have to throw the ring to fall exactly around the stick. Of course, when it's very close, it's easier. When it's farther, it's more difficult. But to the young child, even the close action is difficult because the basic motor skills are not developed. Consider that when we did it, perhaps as children, when we were 5 or 6 or 10 years old, we had never attempted something like that. And when we throw, we are trying to aim, we are trying to make it happen, and we miss, and occasionally it's there, oh, I almost got it, and so on. But what the snake does in its sting, it's like an adult who has never done something, walking in, picking up the disc, throwing it, and it hits precisely on the center, not even off somewhere, exactly in the center. You take a bow and an arrow, and at a distance of 100 meters you shoot, and it goes and hits straight in the center of the bull's eye. It's that kind of precision when you do not even see the bull's eye. Through the trees you shoot the arrow and it hits the bull's eye. It's impossible to us if we try to do it with our conscious mind. Therefore, Sri Aurobindo comments there, as unerringly as the most skillful surgeon, provided the mere limited surface mind with its groping and faltering nervous action does not get in the way and falsify the inner knowledge or the inner will force. If this groping, limited first, and then because it's limited, groping, it's not sure, it is trying this, trying that, faltering nervous action, I tried this but it slips, it is not exact, it is never what I wanted it to be, I wanted my hand to go this way but it went slightly that way, I tried to aim straight but my hand got deflected, and this is normal for any human being. Provided this mind and its limitation, groping, faltering, nervous action get in the way of what? Of the inner knowledge and inner will force. In other words, I am not conscious, but within me is that inner knowledge and the inner will force. If that could act and my mind, limited mind, did not come in the way, it would do it exactly, accurately. And here we come to a very important idea. Within us is already the capacity to do it. Whatever you may have before you as a challenge, and we take this most extreme case, take a bow and arrow which none of us probably has ever lifted, and through the trees where you cannot see, inside behind the bushes is a bull's eye, to shoot and hit the center of the bull's eye. None of our physical senses could help us. None of our logical faculties could help us. In fact, if we engage them, they would hamper. They would have knowledge and the inner will force. But if we can remove them and allow the inner knowledge and the inner will force free and spontaneous flow, not only this inner knowledge knows exactly where it is, knows exactly the relationship of that location with the bow and arrow, knows exactly the biology and the nervous system and the anatomy of my own hands and their limitations and strengths, knows exactly the balance of the wind and the force of the gravity which will change the curve of my shooting, and all of this knowledge is held in the inner being, in the inner infinite subliminal mind, but with it the precise will force that will flow through the nervous system, through the muscles, through the arms, and release at the right moment to get exactly what is needed. It's possible for every one of us. And this is something shocking when you think about it. Because since our childhood we have been taught wrongly that we have to struggle to learn something by acquiring from outside. When the reality is that all learning is an emergence from within. And the external exercise is only an excuse, an occasion for the inner capacity to mold itself and formulate itself. But this being the deeper truth, in evolution, the external effort is also useful. It helps to form the surface mind and develop it. But by the time it is developed sufficiently, it has created a barrier blocking the inner knowledge and the inner will force. And so, having developed the ego form, it must now give way. It must turn inwards and offer itself as a conscious instrument to the deeper knowledge and the deeper will force. And so, having passed through that evolution of an ego sense which blocks, we consciously turn in and allow for that deeper thing to come forward, which means again creating consciously a bridge, a passage for the consciousness and will force to emerge. You will notice in all of the Eastern training systems of any knowledge, any skill, it is this which is taught. In the art of archery as it is taught in Japan traditionally, all the training is for removing the external interference of the mind and person. You will recall the famous book Zen in the Art of Archery, and it is in such a kind of a training that the master is able to express extraordinary skills. You are riding a horse and the horse is galloping, and the gallop of the horse is completely outside your control. You may set it in a general direction, but its particular leap at that moment over a stone is not in your capacity to plan. And as you're moving and your whole physiology and anatomy is moving, never repeating the same rhythm, you take the arrow and the bow, you release it, and it hits exactly on the center. And in that book, if I recall right, it is in this book, that they show the master taking the bow and arrow, not even looking in the direction of the target. He is as if in a different state of consciousness. He takes it out, releases it, and it goes and hits. Or variations to this, which sometimes they show you in movies, where the master stands in front, someone shoots an arrow at his chest from a distance, and in the moment as the arrow reaches him, he catches it with his bare hands and stops it as it is pointing before his chest. The timing involved, the precision involved, the exact force required is impossible to plan, to calculate, or even to practice. How are you going to practice if you're going to miss 100 times before you even get close to it? And yet he does it. And all of these skills become natural, spontaneous, as easy as the snake biting the rabbit and inserting its fang exactly at the center point of a nervous system center. As natural and spontaneous as that. So the third example is looking at something even more deeply, but involving in particular action. Knowledge aspect more deep, but involving also spontaneity of action. And today, as adults, and in particular as seekers and practitioners of the yogic way, with this knowledge, we can change the way we approach our daily life activities, the way we learn new things, and bring these principles into action consciously when we learn new skills. We reread a portion from last time, now because that summarizes this perspective. The Upanishads declare that the mind in us is infinite. It knows not only what has been seen, but what has not been seen. So when I stand in the forest I looked at the rabbit. I did not notice the trees and the crow on top, but it saw that. I cannot see behind the trees and behind the bushes to that hidden target. It sees that. Even what my physical senses do not see. Not only what has been heard, but what has not been heard. I hear the rustling in the leaves as the rabbit moves. I did not notice the wind in the leaves, but it heard that. I could not hear the low rumble of an elephant family about 10 kilometers away as they made a rumbling sound which other elephants can hear across 10 kilometers, which our ears cannot hear, but that heard it. I could not hear the earth moving under my feet as it releases a slight tension, a tremor, which perhaps the subtlest instruments can pick up, but that has heard it. And third, not only what has been discriminated by the thought, but what has not been discriminated by the thought. So I have understood this because I paid attention and thought about it and expected a particular, but all the rest which I didn't notice and did not think about, that also it has known. And beyond that, what I have not even perceived as relevant to my understanding, that also it knows. Let us say then, Sri Aurobindo continues, in the tongue of our modern knowledge, that the surface man in us is limited by his physical experiences. He knows only what his nervous life in the body brings to his embodied mind. So I am sitting here, I am looking, and through the biology, the light goes in, the ears take in these signals, that's all that I know. And even of those bringings, he knows he can retain and utilize only so much as his surface mind sense attends to and consciously remembers. 10 minutes later, I would not remember the motorcycle that passed. Briefly, my mind may consciously pay attention, but I will not remember it, as I do not remember the hundreds of times in the past 20 years that I might have heard a motorcycle pass. It happened once when I was trying to consciously develop as a student. I was consciously working to intensify the memory power. I met a particular friend, his name was Dheer in the class, and I said to him, tell me any number and I will recite it to you after 1 year. I took it as a challenge, and the number he chose was 167. I remember this today, after 30 years perhaps, maybe more, because I paid attention to it and wanted to remember it. And in wanting to remember, I looked at interesting associations of the number, what they meant to me, and imprinted it in my mind in a particular way. Except for that particular number which I remember, I probably don't remember any number which I might have to have remembered then for some temporary work. Or phone numbers perhaps, or a mathematics book that I might have scanned then. Because I was not even conscious, I didn't intend to remember. But that's about it, the rest all goes away. He can retain and utilize only so much as his surface mind sense attends to and consciously remembers. But there is a larger subliminal consciousness within him which is not thus limited. That consciousness senses what has not been sensed by the surface mind and its organs, and knows what the surface mind has not learnt by its acquisitive thought. That in the insect knows the anatomy of its victim. That in the man outwardly insensible not only feels and remembers the surgeon's knife, but knows the appropriate reactions of suffering which were in the physical body inhibited by the anesthetic and therefore non-existent. That in the illiterate servant girl heard and retained accurately the words of an unknown language. Now he's bringing back the three examples in the reverse order. And you notice something else in these three examples. The first one was regarding knowledge of anatomy and action involved. The second one not only involved knowledge, but identification of feelings and the sufferings, sensations through identification. And the third one is the word, adds now one more layer which he has not discussed so far. An unknown language, retained accurately the words of an unknown language, and could, as yogic experience knows, by a higher action of itself, understand those superficially unintelligible sounds. And this brings actually a fourth example, which is basing on a previous example. That there is within that knowledge, that consciousness, the capacity by a higher action of itself to understand those sounds which otherwise are unintelligible. We've all had experiences like this when you're listening to a song in a language you do not know, and the person is perhaps singing wonderfully and evoking emotions. And you say, I didn't understand the words, but I could feel that the mood was like this. You caught something from the emotions of it, the tone of it. But when a passage is recited monotonously, as in that case of a Hebrew scholar reciting in a fixed pattern, you do not have even those clues of emotion. What do you make of it? And yet that higher faculty can, by its own higher action, understand. And this fourth example takes us to something which we briefly touched upon last time. The recognition that all our understanding is essentially that understanding reflected and brought forward. Just as all our skillful action learned is essentially that innate true will being now imprinted and organized in the surface parts. And I want to touch upon these two things in a little more detail because they will help us to develop these capacities if we so choose to. You will recall the incident we have narrated several times here of the mother meeting with a devotee from Karnataka. Panditji had narrated it to us, and he said how a group had come from Karnataka. They met the mother. Subsequently, when they were discussing something, they went to the dining room, they were speaking among themselves. One of the devotees said to the others, I asked mother such and such a question, and this is what she answered. And the others laughed at him and said, impossible. You do not know English, and mother doesn't know Kannada. How could you have asked her? And he said, but I asked her in Kannada, and she replied in Kannada. And so they were all surprised, and the question was, of course, put to Panditji. He took the message to the mother, and mother explained, yes, it happened. And she explained how it happened. She said, there is a level where you rise above language. And at that time, whatever may be the language, words you speak, the communication is taking place on that level. And so while that man spoke in Kannada, the mother connected with him on that level, understood what he spoke, and then she answered in English or French, probably in English at that point. But he understood in Kannada. How it did happen? Understood because she was operating on that level above the language consciousness. How did he get it? And here comes the skill of the mother. She pulled his consciousness up to that level. In her presence, because of a certain receptivity, a certain opening to her, and her consciousness, her energy, her power infusing in him, he was lifted up to a higher level of consciousness. And as he spoke on this level, there was an exchange taking place on a higher level that he was consciously receiving. And so when the mother spoke, she was connecting entirely on that level, although words may be spoken here, the consciousness receiving, And then in his mind, the meaning has been received, it translates into the words that it knows, in the language that it knows, and he remembers it in the words in Kannada. It's possible for all of us to rise in consciousness thus, in that state where we are above language, above words, and thus receive and understand anything. But it takes effort, and we must try to make that effort. Why am I highlighting this? Because with this background we understand that it is not only possible, the faculty is already there, operational. It's just we are unconscious of it and not develop the capacity to become conscious on that level. Because that faculty is operating, as little children, when our parents are conversing, we pick up the words and the vocabulary and absorb its meaning without ever needing to ask, what does this word mean? Only occasionally a person may use a technical term and we ask, what is that? And the person explains with a combination of other words and we get it. There are other examples of this in people in whom the surface mind has somehow been damaged. Sometimes they are autistic, or they are what we call savant, there's a word for it. They're genius, but they seem retarded on the surface. And such cases, one case which was shown on television, you could approach this person, you couldn't have a normal conversation. He was always in some spaced out state. But he had the skill of hands. You could name any object, any animal, any creature the person may have never seen. And he will take this lump of clay or plasticine and shape it perfectly, beautifully, carve it in precision, in detail, with great beauty, like a master sculptor. So if I remember right, it was in the example on television, they told him kangaroo, and he had never seen a kangaroo. And he carved it and shaped it. You could say dinosaur, you could say Tyrannosaurus Rex, and he will make it. Now what is the Tyrannosaurus Rex? No human being has seen those. We have not even seen pictures. Out of bones we reconstruct images of what it might have looked like. We don't even know the color of their skin. We imagine it. The name we have given is an arbitrary name that we give to it. So when I tell this boy Tyrannosaurus Rex, it's in my language an arbitrary term I have assigned to an idea of something which I have never seen and known. Where does he pick up the knowledge to make this exact symbol perfectly in 3 dimensions? Where does that come from? There is this part of our consciousness which knows exactly what you mean when you say Tyrannosaurus Rex, even if you are not sure. And so this is a higher action of this inner consciousness. And because that is there, therefore all the rest of the learning is possible in us. This is the reason why a computer, with all the computing power it has, cannot learn on its own knowledge that it does not have access to. It can only take existing knowledge, rehash, combine, and build upon it more and more complex conclusions. But a human being with that access to higher consciousness can have knowledge which it did not have and has no means of knowing here. Now all of this is important because Sri Aurobindo will refer to it shortly. And this is happening inside animals. When the snake meets a circumstance it has never met before, it knows how to respond. When the deer meets a circumstance it has never met before, it knows how to respond. In the human being, because we have a conscious, rational mind, we start thinking, and with our thinking we construct a response, and in the process cover up what might have been a spontaneous response. And this is a necessary step to emerge out of the infra-rational instinctive consciousness into a conscious self-awareness. But from here we must rise higher to the higher intuitive consciousness, where again we will know, but now consciously. The snake does not know why here. The human being will know exactly what, how, when and where, consciously. That's the difference. So with this review of what we have seen so far, we move now to the next part of the text, where Sri Aurobindo links now the operation of this inner consciousness with the four terms that we had discussed in the previous chapter: Sanjnana, Prajnana, Ajnana, and Vijnana. And because these are Sanskrit terms, not habitual to our use, we briefly look at what they mean again, looking back at the text of the previous chapter. Samjnana, Sri Aurobindo describes as the particular faculty of the mind by which it is able to make a contact of consciousness with an image of things and feel a kind of a sensible possession of it in substance. Prajnana is the consciousness which holds an image of things before it as an object and sets up a relationship with the object or among objects by analysis and synthesis. Samjnana is the taking in. These two faculties are developed in the human mind as it is currently organized. When we meet something new, first it is the samjnana which takes in, we feel it, and then the prajnana which does analysis and synthesis to try to understand. And then the third faculty, ajnana, kicks in, by which we get a hold of it, govern and possess it in power, and can act and will and use it in a conscious will. Behind all this, the true knowledge is in the Vijnana, which holds the totality of the comprehensive knowledge, including everything in essence, in the totality, in the parts, in the properties, spontaneously, truly and completely. Now these four faculties are operational in any consciousness that is active. In our mind, only the first two are developed. They replicate their action by a thinking out process which is erroneous and laborious. But when we meet something new, instantly there is the action of samjnana. We try to feel it and sense it. And then the prajnana, which analyzes, puts it in context, arranges it. Oh yeah, this is what it is. And then the rest, skill of learning, skill of action, we may develop or not. Now, Sri Aurobindo brings us to these four terms. How do they operate in that inner consciousness? To the infinite mind, subliminal to us. He says, to return to the Vedantic words we have been using, there is a vaster action of the sanjnana, which is not limited by the action of the physical sense organs. It was this which sensed perfectly and made its own through the ear the words of the unknown language. When the language is being spoken, I don't even pay attention to it, but this feels and makes it its own, takes in and absorbs it and imprints it as a substance which is now mine. Through the touch, the movement of the unfelt surgeon's knife. So when the knife cut through and I am not feeling the tissue, the consciousness is feeling the movement of the knife in the tissue and can feel each fiber as it is being cut and torn. Through the sense mind or sixth sense, the exact location of the centers of locomotion in the victim insect. It's that which is feeling. Here are the movements, the energy, the locomotion, and here is the center. Feels it and knows. So, it is this which sensed perfectly and made its own through the ear the words of the unknown language, the movements of the unfelt surgeon's knife, through the sense mind or sixth sense, the exact location of the centers of locomotion in the victim insect. So he's describing three senses: the hearing, the touch contact, and then the sixth sense, where none of the other senses are working, it bypasses and sees within. It uses all the senses. There is also associated with it a corresponding vaster action of prajnana, ajnana and vijnana, not limited by the smaller apprehensive and comprehensive faculties of the external mind. So how do these faculties act in the larger mind? He gives examples here. It is this vaster prajnana which perceived the proper relation of the words to each other, of the movement of the knife to the unfelt suffering of the nerves and the successive relation in space of the articulations in the insect's body. Such perception was inherent in the right reproduction of the words, the right narration of the sufferings, the right action of the sting. So here is the prajnana faculty, how it's operating in its larger function. Now in the surface mind, as you speak certain words, I feel in the samjnana, and in the prajnana I catch this sequence. But that inner mind is dealing with words which it does not know at all. And consider if somebody is reciting it has happened to us so many times when we hear songs not in our language several times, we catch bits and pieces. But here the correct succession of sequence is known. It's not just, oh yeah, that word I've heard many times. Here is the exact sequence, and it is the prajnana which places this word, this word, this word, this is the right relation. So in the reproduction of the words, it knows the sequence. Not only that, you could, for example, to that inner mind, you could say, repeat to me the first 10 verses, first word in sequence, then second word in sequence, third word in sequence. Can you imagine that? First word of first verse, first word of second verse, first word of third verse, and then second word of the first verse, second of the second verse, second of the third verse, and so on. Try to recite that even with a poem that you know by heart, and you'll see how difficult it is. But if you place the text in front of you, a printed text, you can do it very easily. Take the text of Savitri, catch the first word of each line and you can repeat it, catch the second word of each line, you can repeat it. Try to do it with the fourth or fifth word, you lose yourself already. You have to count. Is this fifth or is it sixth? You're not sure. You have to count and then you can repeat. Less easily, but still, when it's all there visually before you, it's easy. But when you have heard words, it is this power of prajnana which is placing in a right relation, as if visualizing on a screen, as if putting in a matrix of right order and relation. It may not involve an actual picturization, but it knows this relation. And if you had to picture it in the right relation, it would be this which you would be tapping for the vasta prajnana, which perceived the proper relation of the words to each other. And then of the movement of the knife to the unfelt suffering of the nerves. So as the knife was moving, it is this which registered the sequence. First I felt the knife entering, and then it cut this way, and then it hit the bone, and so there's a sequence. But also in the very act of that, it is placing the physical location in the body. The knife was pointed vertically and then it slanted this way. All of the relationships of things in their arrangement in 3 dimensions. When we observe children trying to construct with their hands some object, you will find they're clumsy. They place something and then they realize, oh, that should have gone before. Now it is not fitting. So you remove it, place the other, put this on top. Often when you do with blocks, it's like that. You try out a piece of the puzzle, it fits here. But when this faculty is active, the prajnana, you look at the pieces of the puzzle, which are all, you look at them and you know immediately, this goes there, this goes there. It's all seen immediately. This fits into that, and all the relationships are there. The surface mind would do it in a laborious way. Does it look like that? Oh yes, this picture resembles the other. But that inner mind looks at it all, and there it is. It knows it. It could quickly arrange. So when you see somebody do that, you say, wow, he is a genius. How did he do it? He himself is not conscious. He says, I look at it and it's obvious. Where did the obvious feeling come from? This power of the inner mind, which is able to see and know, but it's there in all of us. The difference between us and the genius is the link between that and the surface mind. When the link is formed and what the inner mind sees can now leak out to the surface, then I have that capacity. I look at the puzzle with the intention to solve it, and so a passage is there. The inner mind sees, and what it sees leaks through, and I start doing it. So it sees the movement of the knife to the unfelt suffering of the nerves, which was necessary, as he says, to the right narration of the sufferings. And it is this which also, this power of prajnana, which sees the successive relation in space of the articulations in the insect's body. As the insect is moving, the different limbs are moving. As they are moving, you see how they move in space. And right at this point where the nerve has to be stung is going to be at this time the snake is able to move and reach it. Now a bat is flying, insect is flying, they're moving so fast. And the insect is never fly straight, they often go zigzag. And as the bat swoops in, from a distance, it sees the insect's movement and changes its flight and poof, catches it. That tracking movement involves such complexity. When human beings try to do it with missiles, it is so difficult. And very often, when a human boy is watching a cricket ball and wants to catch it, if he looks at the ball and tries to calculate and anticipate, okay, this is the curve, this is the angle, this is where it will come, and you try to catch, you will miss for sure. I remember, because I was already very cerebral at that age, I used to think a lot, I used to read, so I was never good at catching the cricket ball. And the other boys would look at the ball and I was watching them, they would look at the ball and their hands would go like that and catch it. They were not looking at their hands. I was looking at the ball and looking at my hands to place it in the place. It never worked. And then it struck me that you have to stop trying to think. You have to feel the ball and align your body to the feeling, and the body knows and it will catch it. And then I could get it. But what you're doing at that point is removing this surface calculating mind, allowing the inner feel to align itself. But we do it instinctively already. That the kind of calculation involved, and especially where the insect is moving in a complex path, it is so difficult, and yet you see this extraordinary precision in nature. Such perception was inherent in the right reproduction of the words, the right narration of the sufferings, the right successive action of the sting. Even if you see when the snake bites, well, the sting here could be bee also, but since we've taken the example of the snake has to insert the fang, it has to go to a certain depth, and then only it should release the poison. If the poison starts leaking out before, it'll all be wasted. By the time the fang goes in, there's nothing left there. And what makes in the snake's body the right instinct to be able to do all this in sequence? And it's all part of this particular faculty. And so this is, we have seen Samjnana, and now Prajnana, we have seen the third, the Ajnana. The Ajnana, or knowledge will, originating all these actions, was also vaster, not limited by the faltering force that governs the operations directed by the surface mind. So this comes closer to the examples I've already given of the action itself, not just the knowledge of where you should catch the ball, but the action of the hands which catches it. Now I would watch again, catch the ball, I would put the hand in and try to trap the ball. And inevitably my hand would move too soon, the ball would hit after I had closed, or it would close too late and the ball would slip through. And when I watched the others, I found their hand spontaneously moving up and then moving down with the ball and slowly closing around. The best catchers, they never thought. They watched the ball, the hand went up and smoothly slow, there was never a hard impact. I would always hurt my hand, they would never feel an impact. That particular movement and the instinct to know, to hold and to catch the movement with your hand moving at the same speed and then slowing down slowly to bring it to a stop so that you do not feel impact. All that was there instinctively in the children. Those who were more physically based, not too cerebral, did it easily. Those who thought were always clumsy. This is why they speak of geeks and laugh at them for being clumsy in physical activities. But it's only because they have allowed this activity of mind to interfere. And if they shut it and allow their body to follow, they get it as easily. So there is this ajnana which masters the movement, the action, the knowledge will, knowledge becoming will in action precisely. That also is vaster, not limited by the faltering force that governs the operations directed by the surface mind. It is this which is being trained in those advanced methods of the archery or of the martial arts or all of these extraordinary skills that people are able to develop in the domain we call mastery. For that layer, it is spontaneous, effortless. All our training is to form a bridge between that layer and the surface mind, to be able to call upon it at will and to allow its action to reach down to the detail without interruption and distortion by the surface consciousness. Now becomes a willing instrument for the inner secret will. And so now we come to the fourth faculty. And although in these examples the action of the vaster vijnana is not so apparent, yet it was evidently there working through them and ensuring their coordination. The whole thing, coordinating of all of this, the knowledge, the first perception, the reaching out, organization, and then the action, all of these being coordinated in a situation which has never been faced before, is possible because there is this inherent knowledge which knows everything in essence, in whole, in parts, in properties, and all things in their right relation. And that vijnana is as if immanent, holding all this. And all the other specialized functions are operating because that is there, holding the totality. This being our perspective, he brings the focus now to the immediate object, which is understanding the senses. But at present, it is with the samjnana that we are concerned. Here, we should note, first of all, that there is an action of the sense mind which is superior to the particular action of the senses and is aware of things even without imaging them in forms of sight, sound, contact, but which also as a sort of subordinate operation, subordinate but necessary to completeness of presentation, does image in these forms. Now this is a very important idea, and we will end with this for today. It's a very important idea which shows us something behind the form of the five senses. And so before we discuss it, we complete the text where he gives an example. Those who have carried out the study, as he said, this is evident in psychical phenomena, that is in what we call sixth sense operations, things which are psychic powers. Those who have carried out the study and experimentation of them to a certain point have found that we can sense things known only to the mind of others, things that exist only at a great distance, things that belong to another plane than the terrestrial but have here their effects. We can both sense them in their images and also feel, as it were, all that they are without any definite image proper to the five senses. So this is the best example one can give to this particular faculty or working of the senses. That behind the particular form, where you have a picture from sight, or a quality from sound, or a quality of touch, or smell, or taste, there is something which is a sense that is already knowing the thing before it becomes picture, sound, touch, smell, taste. Of which picture, sound, touch, smell, taste are special subordinate actions. And it can exist without them or even express with them. Now this is a very important idea. It's going to open the way for us to a whole range of possibilities, the full scope of which we will discuss next time. But to become conscious of this level of the operation of the senses is a very important step for us. If we can do it consciously, it opens the way also for a deeper knowledge and opening within us as well as beyond our individuality. Because it is with this level of sense that we know things deeply in their essence. If you want to know the soul of the flower, it is in this way that you have to penetrate. If you want to know your own soul, your own psychic being, it is in this way that you penetrate to know it. From that knowing, there may be an imaging in form, in sight, in sound, in quality of contact, smell, taste, whatever, but they will be subordinate. And if you stop with the image, picture, you will see a picture, but the picture will not be the thing itself. To know the thing itself, you must know in a sense which is not already differentiated into these five things. So there is this essential sense which we have to become familiar with. But for now, he is leading us to recognize it through certain experiences and at least to understand that it is there. When he is describing three kinds of things we can know. Something which is in someone's mind does not have a picture. It's an idea. It is an intention. You cannot create a picture for it, or a sound, or a color, or a taste, or anything. The person has an idea. I would like to do this. Or he's thinking, or he has an intention. I would like to meet this person. Or I would like to take advantage of this situation. Whatever may be the intention, you cannot give a picture to that intention. And yet you can know it. Somebody approaches and you feel, his intentions are not very clear. Someone else comes and you feel, this is very comfortable, very clear. Now out of that you can give an image. When this person came, I felt very clear, bright vibes. So I'm already bringing a picture and a sensation. Or somebody else came, I felt dark, heavy. I'm translating it into the five senses in the way I know them. But and at that point you are forced to reduce yourself to vibes, something abstract, something intangible, non-material. How are you feeling it? What are you feeling? It's consciousness making contact with consciousness. The point of contact itself has no color. It has no weight. And yet we translate it into the normal sense forms we are familiar with. He had as if a heavy cloud on him. He was sad or depressed or unhappy. You feel that sensation of emotion and it translates into these. But you notice the heavy dark cloud is secondary to the feeling itself, which is of sadness. Then it translates in your consciousness as heavy, dark. But the thing itself didn't have weight or color, right? So notice this point of contact where you know. We'll take another example which is most easy for us. Do you know that you're conscious? You feel that you're aware of yourself? Oh yes, I'm aware. What does it feel like, your awareness? It doesn't have weight, it doesn't have picture, it doesn't have color, it doesn't have sound, it doesn't have, at best you might say, contact. I'm aware because I feel my own awareness. But is there a contact of a pressure? You cannot describe contact. But you're identified. There is identification, and you know because you're aware and you're identified with the awareness. That's it. Become conscious of this, and it is in this way that you make contact with things. So Sri Aurobindo says 3 things. What is happening in someone else's mind, things that exist only at a great distance, and then things which belong to other worlds than the terrestrial, but which have their effect here. So now if other than what's in someone's mind, you want to know what's happening far away, remote viewing, or what is happening on another plane, things with forces which are working now on a higher level, of which there will be a physical result soon, because already the event has taken place there. You can know these things first on contact of consciousness. And if you have developed in yourself this ability to hold the contact without quickly reducing it to image, sight or sound, then you will know more truly. It is when you are able to hold yourself like this, that when an inspiration or an intuition comes, you receive it in the way it is, and then allow it to take on form, allow it to reveal itself in specific images, sensations and sounds. But it chooses, it spontaneously flows into a mold of sounds and images. Often it picks those images and sounds which are natural to your mind. So it's like this. It's as if a magnetic energy comes, and because of the particular quality of its vibration, of the knowledge it brings, it pulls, it evokes in my consciousness the memories which associate with this vibration. And something I had read 20 years ago which I had forgotten pops up, and I say, the best example for this is, and I draw on this. Something I might not even have consciously thought of now, it just comes up when the knowledge experience bundle enters my mind as an intuition, and it pulls this and clothes itself in this. The same bundle entering somebody else would clothe itself in the image natural to him. When Ramakrishna Paramahansa used to give very simple examples to explain complex philosophical or spiritual truths, he drew those examples from the life he knew, from the world of the village life. Simple things, simple examples, but they could resonate easily with the people around him who lived those things and knew those experiences. And it's so simple when you say something like, the cup has to be emptied before it can be refilled. It hits you straight away. Oh yes, that makes sense, because that's an experience we have, and it resonates with this particular insight that comes. When you think of the what which becomes still so that it can reflect the sky and the sun and form a perfect image. Oh yes, that makes sense. And your mind has to be like that. It makes sense, because these are symbols which are living for you. For somebody living in the city life, the images would be different. You use examples of a mobile phone, for example, which shows how you can communicate at a distance. Or today they use examples of radio. You tune in the right frequency, and then you have access to that knowledge. Tuning is that rotating this knob on the old radios. In the new ones, you don't tune like this. You push a button and it finds the next station. But it's still called tuning. The experience has changed physically, but for those who belong to the earlier generation where you had to turn a knob, it makes sense. It's something which moves. It aligns to, and when it hits, suddenly the sound is loud. When it goes out of sync, it fades out. Fades in full and fades out again. And you tune in to bring to the middle where it is perfectly aligned. But to the new generation which pushes buttons without rotating, it doesn't have the meaning. And perhaps when the same image has to be presented 10 years from now with the new generation, a different symbol, a different representation will be drawn up. But you see here, the thing itself can come without form or sound or any of the five senses. But as it enters your mind, it can pull naturally these symbols and images which belong to your life experience and represent through them. But we must learn to hold there. And it is in this way that when you reach out to feel what's happening somewhere else, first there's a point of contact of consciousness meeting consciousness. Then out of that, bit by bit, layer by layer, it feels heavy or it feels light. It feels moving or it feels still. You see, the first sensations are of contact. Then out of that, emotions, it is bubbling, jumping, happy, or it is confused. You feel emotions. And then comes the image, the bright light or dull color, whatever form it takes. And then the shape emerges. It is rounded, shiny. It's moving, and so on. And eventually, it may take a full, vivid experience. You say, this is what it is. This is how you will see if you watch somebody doing a remote viewing session. That's the way they enter. Eventually the whole thing emerges and finally a picture forms. And the same when you engage or seek to sense things on the higher worlds. What's happening? What's imminent in the next week? And you feel something, a pressure, a vibration, a disturbance or something clarifying. And that's how one begins to know. We can both sense them in their images and also feel as it were all that they are without any definite image proper to the five senses. And so this we might describe as a kind of a sixth sense not bound to the form of the five senses. So we will take this up next Sunday, and from this he will lead us to the true sense of the faculty of samjnana which is operating behind all five senses, and then understand why there are five. So it's a very fascinating exploration. I'm not aware of anybody in any text who has ever gone so deep in the working of the senses and the operation of consciousness in perception. It's a great gift for humanity with many practical implications. So we recall within us is this greater mind, and it is possible to actually allow its knowledge and that secret's true, perfect will to act within us. And as sadhakas, it is part of the effort we must make in our life and in all new learning. It's the means by which we will access higher intuitive consciousness which will act within us.